What's going on, guys? Welcome back to Winter Wolf's Den, coming at you for a second video of the day today. I wanted to touch base on Lord of the Rings, Rings of Power versus House of the Dragon for a quick second. And I don't think it's too early to say that I think the results are in. But before we get into it, if you want to hit the like button, subscribe to the channel as I continue to cover these things as they come up, I'd really appreciate it. And we'll get right into it. So we're through 3 episodes of House of the Dragon, 2 episodes of Rings of Power, and I think the people have spoken. As we're going to see through a couple of the infographics that I'll have up here in a couple seconds. The people have spoken, the fix is in. House of the Dragon's going to come out on top of this. They spent a fraction of the money. They've delivered a product while under the gun of having had a disappointing end to the original Game of Thrones here, and I think they're giving the people what they want. It's kind of funny. We're really seeing a tale of 2 companies take 2 very different routes to delivering a fairly similar product. At the end of the day, they're both fantasy IPs that had built-in fan bases that stretch back decades, much longer so with Tolkien, but decades nonetheless. With the Game of Thrones series, we had several good seasons and several good books that kind of drew people in. With Tolkien, we have the original trilogy, the Fellowship trilogy of films, or the Hobbit trilogy of films, and of course the legendary books being there. But there's source material there, and what we're getting here, I think, is one company seeing the writing on the wall about a year ahead of where the other company is seeing it. And I think what it boils down to is, while House of the Dragon had its fair share early on of some of the showrunners and a couple of the actors pointing out some of the same gripes that people on the creative side of Rings of Power had with that particular franchise about representation, inclusivity, and things like that, diversity in casting. I think they kind of figured out that it was best to probably put that stuff away for a little bit ahead of the launch, and just let the chips fall where they may, that if they had a good enough product, sooner or later, the only 2 groups of people that would mind if they had to race swap some characters were purists of the IP, and you're never going to please them because the purists are always going to want a strict 100% canonical interpretation of the thing they love. And that's not to be faulted. There are just some people like that. That happens across sports, that happens across genre fiction, hell, that happens across cars. You make one small modification to a Corvette for a next model year, and the original purists are going to bitch and complain that the lines and the curves don't look the same way. So that's human nature. That's not to be faulted. And if you're one of those people, that's just who you are, and that's fine. And the other group of people that were going to be pissed that characters were race swapped were the legitimate a-hole, racist pieces of shit that doesn't need to pay them any mind at all. But that's not a majority of fans. I think more people are likely purists, having grown up with a certain IP or a certain widget a certain way, and they just expect things to kind of honor that tradition. Now, having said that about House of the Dragon, I think we get a different look at that going with Rings of Power, where leading into the release of that show, we're having articles from the Hollywood Reporter, we're having articles from Collider and Deadline and all the usual suspects that are already laying down cover fire for a show that hasn't even launched. And I think that's telling. At this point, we've seen these maneuvers enough times to know that this is just something straight out of their playbook. This is going to be the go-to. Is they know ahead of time people are onto this now, and they're going to 100% try to cram this bullshit down your throat to gaslight you into thinking you're the problem, and it's not their pitiful writing, it's not their pitiful canon breaking changes, not even the race swap stuff, but just having characters that are alive in the wrong age, or characters acting completely out of their established behavioral patterns and things like that. People are hip to that kind of thing. I think we're seeing that now, especially with Rings of Power, because you got to consider like the marketing reach and the marketing power of Amazon had the ability to put this show in front of hundreds of millions of people that were already built-in customers because they already had Prime anyway. Like, that's the thing. You didn't have to go out of your way to check this show out. You had the capability, and it was pre-programmed, and you didn't have to spend any extra money to get it. It's not locked on a tier behind Amazon Prime Plus or something like that. You just had this. You could have watched it. And sure, they're going to try and gaslight you with some bullshit about their numbers with, the 25 million viewers. Well, they had to walk that back from what I understand. It's not 25 million viewers. It's 25 million accounts that sampled the program. And by the program, I mean episode 1. We don't know anything about how episode 2 was received by people at large yet. We're just going off episode 1. And I think these numbers, they further get whittled down once you put them into context. Like, they could have come out and said they had 50 billion viewers, 50 billion unique views, or 50 billion people checking it out. But if they don't tell me, you know, the TOT, if they don't give me the time where people actually tuned out of the program, then it doesn't matter. If you have an hour-long episode of a program and you check it out for 4 minutes through the prologue or 15 minutes through the first act and decide it sucks, how does that count as a view? Like, I wouldn't qualify that as a review. When I read a book, if I don't finish, you know, I got to finish at least half of it or 3/4 of it, unless it's glaringly awful, before I write a review that, you know, judges it objectively on its own merit. But they don't have to disclose that kind of information. They're hiding that. They're hiding their metrics. There's no transparency. You're not allowed to know how many people bailed. Now, on top of that, we're not allowed to know how many people were watching this episode, Rings of Power, on devices that had features like autoplay enabled, whereby if you scroll over its title or banner for more than 1/8 of a second, the video starts playing. Did they get to count that as a click? People are suggesting yes. So I think that the numbers have been fudged in a very real way. We see the same things with Amazon going ahead and having a blockade or a moratorium on their reviews for the first 72 hours. But as we're going to see in this picture here, we're coming up on Wednesday now. It's almost midnight here in Eastern time in America. And you can post reviews. I just posted my own 2-star review for episode 1, but it's telling me it's going to take days to process. And then if you look down here at the little bottom of the how we do our rating system, it specifically indicates that they're analyzing the review to make sure it's in good faith. And I'll tie that back to a video that I had earlier in the week. Who are they to tell me what's in good faith when I'm writing the review? And it's kind of funny how they only seem to apply that standard to in good faith if somebody just shows up and shits all over the product. Like, when we go actually and had the ability to see their 5-star and their 4-star reviews, I don't see a whole lot of those reviews if they're 10 words or less, or basically just say greatest show ever. They're not taking a whole lot of those down. You know, and we've seen this time and time again with the other review aggregators like Rotten Tomatoes, which is complicit in all this in a whole different way, where they're scrubbing reviews behind the scenes but in real time. So if you're on their page and hit refresh, you can see reviews being removed as they're going. And when you're talking about a new IP that should have hundreds of reviews pouring in, but the percentage stays the same on the critic side, where it's hovering right around 85, like, how can that number not change the first 3, 4, or 5 days into the launch of a massive global IP of a show that they anticipated was going to have millions of people watching? Like, it doesn't add up, and you don't even have to try to figure it out anymore. It's like it just doesn't pass the sniff test even for the normies, which is why when you get into, you know, Twitter comments and YouTube comments on these things, is now everybody knows the line, you know, evil cannot create. Like, they know, like, people are hip to them lying now, and they're not going to be tuning in for episode 3 on Friday, and you're never going to hear feedback from Amazon about viewer numbers on episodes 2 and 3 going forward. You know, and they have nobody to blame but themselves. So I hope that anybody enjoying Rings of Power, more power to you. I'm not judging your taste or anything like that. That's up to you to decide. But I think it's delicious is the word I'm looking for. It's delicious to see these guys shoot themselves in the foot by running their traps ahead of time and talking down to people, demonizing and labeling people that were just fans, people that have never done anything harmful in their lives. And here we go, being gaslighted into you know, them trying to make you feel like you were a monster for not liking the show because you had a gripe with something one of their actors said on social media, or you were just a fan of canon. Yeah, I think Morfydd Clark and Sophia Nomvet, they didn't do this show any favors, and that's too bad. I think Sophia Nomvet as Diza was one of the more likable characters in the show, and if I didn't have to be tortured by her Instagram feed of her, it's just ongoing overemphasizing of breaking down color barriers in fiction. Like, it's 2022. Like, somebody needs to get her a list of films that have featured prominent black actresses in it. Like, no one's giving you a gold star for being a black dwarf in this. Like, Willow had black dwarves. We've had black characters of other fantasy races in IPs and games going back years. Like, you've accomplished nothing. You were just cast for a job. Like, you're not curing cancer, and all your talk of activism, like, it was literally just you grandstanding because your character through 2 episodes, through the 8 minutes of screen time you have, isn't the activist character that you claimed Diesel was going to be. So unless they turn that up to 12 in the next 6 episodes, all you did was take advantage of a few minutes in front of a camera in an interview to put off people that just don't want to hear about that kind of stuff when they're trying to watch Lords of the Rings. You know, you had a better chance at getting people on the side of your cause, whatever it might have been, if you're not constantly browbeating them over it when they're trying to escape for a couple hours and just watch something they enjoy. And I think you guys are going to learn that the hard way coming up on Friday with episode 3. But in the meantime, I just wanted to kind of jump on that dog pile a little bit because it's hilarious for me to watch them crash and burn this and have to have their media machine spin it in real time. But I'll get back to you guys on Thursday evening with the She-Hulk review, and I hope to see you then.